Greetings. Welcome to the second family conference online. I'm really excited to be a part of this again. If you saw my presentation from last year or you get to see it this year on the science of high risk behavior, please know that I feel honored that you chose my presentation and I hope that you find it really useful. This particular presentation is called Ecigs and Vaping, and I entitled it "The History Repeats Itself?" because I want to challenge watchers of this presentation to kind of look at this topic within the context of our history, as a lot of us do. So when I think about the history of cigarettes or the history of how Americans tend to latch on to things that they think are really great ideas, only to come to find out later, it wasn't such a good thing, especially when it comes to chemicals or intoxicants. And so if we kind of look at history, we can see that in the late 1800s, heroin was actually considered a safe over-the-counter children's medicine. Heroin was used, unfortunately, to help people get off of cocaine, to help people fall asleep, as kind of one of those panacea cure-alls. And as you can see, it was Bayer Pharmaceutical Products that actually produced this. Interestingly enough, we all know kind of our history of in the early 1900s. The company Coca-Cola actually began by putting cocaine in their drinks, and which had, I bet, a wonderful stimulating effect for many people. But then later on, we found out, unfortunately, how addictive it is, and is not used anymore. However, back then, Coca-Cola was seen as a safe way to cure things like depression and indigestion, all kinds of kind of panacea cure-all things again. Now, if we actually look at the history of cigarettes, let's go back into the 1950s.
You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose. In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Why not change to Camels for the next 30 days and see what a difference it makes in your smoking enjoyment? See how Camels agree with your throat. See how mild and good-tasting a cigarette can be.
She's kind of creepy looking, isn't she? But that actually aired on the air in 1950. And so, it makes me think about kind of how things get started and are usually we have good intentions. So, like, for instance, the rationale for development for e-cigs came from this man. His name is Han Lick, and he developed vaporizing in 2003, really in response to his father dying of lung cancer. What he wanted to do was provide a safer alternative that reduced fire hazard for traditional cigarettes. We know that in traditional cigarettes, there's a lot of harmful chemicals and tar. And he really wanted to figure out how to cut those down in order to give a safer alternative to smoking. And thus came e-cigs from really kind of this idea. Have you guys ever seen a fog machine or a smoke machine? Sometimes they have them in theaters or at dances and things like that. But it's actually the same ingredients in this machine found in e-liquid. So e-liquid is primarily composed of a few substances. The first one is propylene glycol. Now, propylene glycol is the base ingredient in antifreeze. The second ingredient is vegetable glycerin, which is a common food preservative found in tiny amounts in our foods. There's varying amounts of nicotine in this product. It's also very important to remember that there are many e-liquid manufacturers who sell e-liquid that does not have any nicotine in it, the 0 milligrams. But there was a study that was done that did a random selection of 0 milligram e-liquids and found trace to large amounts of nicotine in those. It's always important to remember that there's no governing agency out there like the FDA that actually monitors the quality of these products. So what is the reasons why people sell 0 milligram nicotine e-liquid? Well, primarily to get young people hooked on kind of the idea of using it. And then when they're older and can buy it legally, they may start using the nicotine and get addicted. So the last ingredient is different artificial flavorings. And one of my students told me that his favorite flavor of e-liquid is unicorn vomit. And I just thought, that is just not a flavor that was marketed with adults in mind. So I think we have a good idea of where these companies are getting their marketing ideas and who their primary target population is. So I think it's important to remember, though, that propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, these are all just chemical syrups, like a liquid chemical syrup. This is put into a vaporizer, which is a little contraption that heats up the chemical syrup into a vapor, and then it's inhaled into the lung tissue. So they come in lots of different shapes and sizes. Some of them are called mod boxes, which looks kind of, like this bigger one. Other ones come in more kind of cigarette looking shapes. Lots of different sizes. And then there's this one right here, the Jewel, which is usually the most widely known and popular one today. We'll talk more about the Jewel in a minute. But when we see kind of rock stars and celebrities that are out in public with these funky looking machines and they're vaping all over the place, it can really provide this kind of idea that it's hip, slick, and cool to do this. And our marketing companies, the e-cigarette, e-vapor marketing companies, they use a lot of tips and tricks to get younger audiences, just like this particular minion who's saying vape on. That really irks me because, minions are usually kind of popular with the elementary school crowd. And unfortunately, that's as young as they want to start a marketing to. But their claims, they claim that there's no offensive odors in vaping, that it's cheaper than smoking cigarettes, that you can vape anywhere without disturbing anybody. It's a safer alternative to traditional tobacco products, and that you can actually reduce cigarette cravings and nicotine withdrawal symptoms by switching over to vaping. So let's kind of pull the curtain back and use some critical frontal lobe skills to examine this marketing. Now, this is an actual advertisement from an e-cigarette company. And it's very deceptive to me because they're not really comparing apples to apples here, but they want you to think that they are. So take a look at the tobacco cigarette here on the left. What they're saying is that e-cigs have all these, tobacco cigarettes have all these really harmful chemicals, and they kind of, list a bunch of them. And so they even say that nicotine is used in herbicides and insecticides, which it is. One drop of pure nicotine can kill you, and therefore it's modified to be less potent, but potent enough to actually kill insects. Now, this ad compares it. It says, are e-cigs safe? And they compare it to an e-cig over here on the right, which looks rather kind of innocuous. It's just this e-cig with a battery and an atomizer, a cartridge, and it's got some e-liquid and nicotine and natural flavoring. That looks just so much safer than what you see over here on the left. But what they don't actually do is list all the harmful toxic chemicals in e-liquid that are in that too. I just went a little too fast here. And so what you see is if you really compare apples to apples, is you would know that there's about 3,600 to 5,000 harmful toxic chemicals in tobacco. If you compare that to e-liquid, there's about 20 to 50 harmful toxic chemicals. So if you just compare on the surface and look at number, e-cigs and e-liquid is actually a lot safer than tobacco products just because of the sheer amount of harmful toxic chemicals found in cigarettes as opposed to e-liquid. But remember, the operative word here is still toxic. And there are about 20 to 50 harmful toxic chemicals found in e-liquid. So let's talk about those. When those chemicals, like propylene glycol or ethylene glycol, main ingredient in e-cigs, e-liquid, when those are heated, they actually start to give off emissions, or they break down into different components. And those components include formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, acrolein, diacetyl, heavy metals, and ethylene glycol. Now, a lot of these have been known to cause irritation to tissue in our bodies, eye tissue, lung tissue. If you think about what formaldehyde and acetaldehyde are used for, they're used in embalming to make things harder and preserve tissue. Things like diacetyl have been found to cause popcorn lung disease. The way that it got its name is that there are a lot of chemicals like diacetyl found in microwave popcorn butter. And in a lot of workers that worked in these microwave popcorn places actually started coming down with what they called popcorn lung disease. And this is a picture of it over here to the right. We're looking from the top down into the lung tissue, and you can see there's these tiny little pockets of dead tissue caused by diacetyl getting into the lung tissue and killing off these particular parts of the lung, kind of making like little popcorn places in the lung. Okay, so here's another ad. Let's kind of critically analyze this one. It says, "What's in your e-cig?" At Mystic, we understand that you care about what you put in your body. So here's the lowdown. Mystic e-cigs contain only 4 ingredients: water, flavoring, nicotine, and propylene glycol. They make it sound like it's just so innocent and safe. And even down here, they actually say that propylene glycol, it's just a common preservative. Unlike traditional cigarettes, which contain hundreds of harmful ingredients, Mystic e-cigs contain only ingredients we can understand. Just water, flavoring, nicotine, and a preservative. Interesting, they don't really kind of tell you what that preservative is doing to your lung tissue, the stuff, propylene glycol. Here's another ad. It says, "Start vaping and stop smoking. Switch to an electronic cigarette today." Well, the research is still really young because remember, e-cigs have only been out since about 2003, and we've only got really about a decade of really good research on this. And of course, it means longitudinal studies are limited to how long it's actually been out. So the World Health Organization does not actually consider e-cigs to be a legitimate form to quit smoking because they looked at the research and they found that the percentage of people who actually quit smoking after trying e-cigarettes is only about 31%. So for those 31%, it sure does help them quit smoking. But what are they doing now? They're actually just ingesting nicotine through a new system, the system of vaping. So what we actually have seen is that a lot of people who start vaping end up smoking because you can sometimes get cigarettes at cheaper levels or easier, or they just switch to something that they enjoy more rather than vaping. So it's pretty dangerous to actually say that it's a legitimate way to stop smoking, but it's also really kind of hinky because, it's kind of like doing a bait and switch. Right? They say you can quit smoking, but you're actually can still addicted to the most addictive substance we know on the face of the earth, nicotine. So I want to talk about nicotine for a little bit because it takes on average the U.S. smoker about 10 years on average to quit smoking. It is a highly addictive chemical. And I want to talk about why nicotine is so addictive. So, if you watch my other presentation on the science of high risk behavior, the neuroscience, you would have seen that graph that shows how much dopamine is increased when we ingest specific chemicals in our body. But it's also really important to remember that nicotine does not increase dopamine levels as high as some of those other drugs do, but it actually increases a lot of different chemicals at the same time, making it really potent. The most addictive substance that we know of on the face of the earth in your body, and it starts making structural changes to your brain as quickly as 8 seconds. Like I said earlier, it's very toxic. One drop can kill you. We've seen an increase in ER visits for nicotine overexposure because these e-liquids sometimes come in little tiny bottles and then can get misplaced and dropped onto hands, which can actually absorb into your system and cause major heart issues really quickly. We know that it's used in pesticides. It can be very expensive as a nicotine product, an e-liquid. We know that tobacco users spend over $2,000 a year on products, but it's easy to see as kids do that and adults do that with vaping products. We know that smoking slows lung growth and reduces lung function. And we also know that it causes your heart rate to increase, causing heart and breathing problems. We've seen that cancer and chronic lung disease has been linked to cigarettes, not necessarily to nicotine, but to the harmful ingredients that are caused by tobacco. We also know that nicotine can arrest brain development. That's why it's really critical that anybody under the age of 25 not use products like nicotine because of how it can affect brain growth and development. Now, this company, the Juul, they advertise that they can put this nicotine product into a smaller little package, these little pods, and they're tiny, they're only about this big. And one Juul, it's really ingenious because they figured out how to synthesize nicotine into these nicotine salts so it can go into these smaller areas. What many people don't know is that one little Juul pod equals the same amount of nicotine that's in an entire pack of cigarettes. Now, I had a student last year who said, "Doc, I've been vaping about 3 pods a day, and I'm having trouble stopping. Do you think I'm addicted?" And I said to this smart young man, he really is smart, I said, yes, you're becoming addicted, but did you know the translation? He said, well, no, I didn't know how much nicotine was in them because, the website tells you how many milligrams, but they don't give you the equivalents. And if I'd have known that I was vaping up to 3 packs of cigarettes a day in nicotine, I would have not done that. But the company doesn't tell you that, and I wonder why. Because they don't want you to know what the equivalency is. They want you to continue buying it, so they make lots of millions of dollars and can give huge bonuses to their employees. So we know that kids who start using nicotine younger are about 9 times more likely to abuse or become dependent upon alcohol, and about 13 times more likely to use illegal substances. This is why nicotine is known as the #1 gateway drug that leads to other things. There's really kind of a couple reasons why. Scientists believe that it changes the brain chemistry and primes your brain to become addicted faster to other things, and that it also has really negative effects on the brain development. It really arrests the development of the brain so that kids are not making the best decisions as possible. Okay, let's talk about what nicotine does into your system the very first time you start using it. One of the reasons why it's so highly addictive, because it does all of these things at once. Nicotine really tricks your body into thinking that you're exercising. And so what we see is that as soon as somebody begins to smoke or vape and the nicotine enters the blood system, is it causes this rapid release of adrenaline. And this is kind of the rush or the hit that you hear users talk about. And that tricks your body into thinking that you're exercising. And so what it does is it starts to rapidly release your glucose stores so that you kind of get this sudden burst of energy. Then, in order to balance that out, your body starts to balance out, releasing insulin, increasing your total metabolic rate. Again, thinking that you're exercising, your body starts to increase its natural acetylcholine, which is the neurochemical that is responsible for activating muscle tissue. Then your body starts to release dopamine levels to make you feel nice and calm and happy. And then it releases glutamate to help you remember this sensation. And then because your body thinks it's exercising, it starts to actually increase endorphins, just like it would if it were a runner's high. So all of these chemicals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all at once. All at once. This is why it's the most addictive substance on the face of the earth, and it takes a long time to quit once you actually become addicted to nicotine. Now, vaporizing has given rise to another activity of vaping marijuana products. And this is really interesting advertisement because it was actually a real advertisement that I received an email for. Now, remember, I do research on a lot of high risk behavior, so I get funny emails a lot, unfortunately. But this one actually just really had me rolling. It said, "Do you know what you're putting in your lungs? Smoking versus vaporizing. Why smoking marijuana isn't ideal, but why vaporizing marijuana is better for you." Oh boy. Oh, say they go on to talk about how vaporizing marijuana emits a vapor that is about 95% smoke and carcinogen free. It's so interesting how they get that number. Like, I just wonder who decided that that should come into it. But let's talk about this. There are some new marijuana products. They're really not new. They've been around for a really long time, but the fad is becoming extremely popular. And basically, that is to create marijuana extracts or something that's called hash oil resins. Basically, the green leafy bud is boiled down with butane fluid to create this kind of goopy product here. This is an example of what's called dabs or wax, because it kind of looks like earwax, or honey bowl, butter, or dabs or shatter, which this is shatter over here. So basically, what is extracted in this butane process is really concentrated levels of THC without the green leafy substance. And then a little bit of this material is either broken off or dabbed into a vaporizer and vaped, which means it's heated into a vapor and inhaled into the lungs. Now, this particular product, albeit interesting because it's not the green leafy bud, it's much easier to do. A lot of kids are using something called trippy sticks to do this stuff in class because it has absolutely no marijuana odor because the bud is not there anymore. But because this is a hash oil resin, it has more concentrated amounts of THC. And so this particular chart, it only goes up to 2013. So I suspect that it's old data, but you can see that these are the THC percentages in hash oil samples from all across the United States. There's a potency monitoring program that collects this data, and you can see that in 2013 it was actually up to 52.49% THC. Now, let me kind of give you a percentage. The average amount of THC found in the green leafy bud in Texas in 2016 was about 16 to 27%. Now, remember, in 1969, the amount of natural THC found in marijuana was about 2 to 3%. But because marijuana is genetically modified to have higher and higher amounts of THC, which is the active ingredient that causes addiction, we're seeing higher rates in lots of these products, and it's easier to get that in hash oil products. Now, many states that have legalized recreational and medicinal use of marijuana have genetically modified it so much so that the amount of THC level is just skyrocketed. I saw an advertisement in Colorado when I visited about 3 years ago that said a dispensary could get their THC levels up to 99%, which just baffles me because we've started to see overdose deaths caused by cannabis toxicity since Colorado legalized recreational use. It's really scary to me because this is so much more addictive, and because students are using it in vaporizers, this particular product is about 4 to 5 times more addictive than actually just the green leafy bud. Now, we're learning as a culture, kind of going back to history. We kind of rush in and we think something's a great idea, and then we kind of learn from the consequences. And these numbers go up to about 2016, and this is kind of national statistics on different kind of tobacco and e-cigarette products that middle school students use and high school students use. And you can see a lot of these charts are going down. What this is telling us is that students are using less tobacco products, and that makes me a very happy therapist and prevention researcher, because a lot of our public service announcements and prevention programming on tobacco has really been effective, and students are starting to learn how dangerous these products are for your family, for you, for your long term. But if you notice here, e-cigarettes, that one's going in the wrong direction for middle schoolers and for high schoolers. Boy, 2015 was a big year. But you also notice that it went down in 2016. So what I'm kind of hoping is that we're going to see, as this new research comes out and we're starting to really learn that advertising is not what they really say it's all chalked up to be, that we'll start doing this less and less. So I kind of want to go back to this big history experiment that we've been doing. With tobacco, it was a staple of the American kind of crop. We, interestingly enough, as a culture, have made a lot of money, have becoming addicted to nicotine and tobacco products over the years, thinking that this was a healthy, good thing, only to find out that it has a deleterious effect on our bodies, on our teeth, uh, our skin. This is an example of two twins, one twin who did not smoke and another twin who did. You can see that its effect on our system is deleterious. Even on our unborn children, when moms smoke, it can cause low birth weight and other complications. So our historical experiment, we have learned, really wasn't the best idea after all, that maybe we made a lot of money, but our public health suffered the consequences of that. Do we really need to go through this with vaping again? Do we have to learn our lessons? The answer seems to be right now is yes, unfortunately. We have to go through this history lesson all over again to learn the negative effects. But maybe we don't have to do that as long as it took us to learn the history and the effects of tobacco and nicotine. So my references are here. If you would like to see them, I'd love to send those to you. And I do want to share with you that I've got my email address here. My website is www.drcrystalcollier.com. And I do want you guys to know that I'm writing a neurodevelopmental guide called the Neuro Whereabouts Guide. It will be published this August. And so if you would like to get on my email list to know when it's coming out, it'll have all kinds of information about brain development and how different high-risk behavior affect the brain as it's growing and developing. There's an elementary and middle and high school chapter which will describe which high-risk behavior pop up at what ages and what families can do to prevent those. And then the last chapter is all about tools and tricks and tips that families can use to prevent or treat, if it happens, those issues along the way. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation and the rest of the family conference. Please feel free to contact me if you'd like the slides. I would love to share them with you so that you can kind of pass them along. All right, you guys, have a great family conference.